Welcome to Intro to Inverses. In order to find the inverse of a function, you need to switch the domain and range. Domain is x, range is y. So in order to find the inverse, you need to start by switching the x and y values. That means in this equation, y equals 2x plus 2, I'm going to leave everything the same except for the x and y. I'm now going to write this as x equals 2y plus 2. From there, we usually have equations as y equals. Right now we have an x equals. So you're going to solve for y and get an equation as y equals. In order to get the y by itself, you need to divide by 2, and you should get x minus 2 over 2 is equal to y. If this is a free response, you are more than welcome to leave your answer like this. However, on the regions, they are probably going to simplify it more. If you wanted to simplify it more, you would have to do 1x over 2 is 1/2 x, and then negative 2 over 2 is negative 1. So the red is also the correct answer. It's most likely what you're going to see on multiple choice questions because it's fully simplified. Now notice I have y equals 2x plus 2, and now I have y equals something else. They're not both y equals because they're different equations. So in order to show that they're different equations and that the red is our inverse, we're going to rewrite this as y with a negative 1 exponent. That negative 1 exponent is read as y inverse. Is equal to 1/2 x minus 1. Now we have the same equations. We have y equals 2x plus 2 and the inverse 1/2 x minus 1 that we just found. Pause the video and try to find several observations, 3 actually. Your first observation should be that the slopes are reciprocals. So when we're talking about inverses, if the first slope is 2 over 1, the inverse slope is going to be 1/2. Knowing that the slopes are reciprocals is a great way to make sure that your answer is correct. The next observation is that the x and y coordinates are switched. So if you look at the tables, in the first table we have negative 1, 0. And in the next table, the inverse has the coordinate 0, negative 1. If you look in the first table, you have negative 3, negative 4. So I know that my inverse table should have negative 4, negative 3 because all you're doing is switching the x and y value. You're not changing the actual plus or minus signs of anything. So if you have a coordinate x, y, that means you should go to y, x for the inverse. And lastly, the third observation is that they are reflections over the line y equals x. So the line y equals x is the diagonal line through the order. And if you look, the two graphs are perfect reflections over that diagonal line. So if you can't ever figure out if it's an inverse algebraically, you can always check the graph to see if they're reflections of each other. Although it is kind of hard sometimes to see reflections over the line y equals x. Let's talk about the notation. If you want to find f of x, the inverse has a negative 1. Now, it's not pronounced f negative 1 of x. You're going to say f inverse of x. If a question asked you for the inverse of f inverse, you're going to do the same exact process and it'll bring you back to f of x. So if you do these steps to find the inverse, you can do the same exact steps to go from the inverse to the original. Let's actually take some notes down. If the equation is in function notation, which means f of x, rewrite it first as y equals. So if you had f of x is equal to 2x, you should write that as y equals 2x. Once you write it as a y equals, you're going to switch x and y. Once you do that, your third step is to solve for y. And keep in mind, if f of x is the function, then the inverse is f inverse of x. Let's try a few examples. So for the first one, we have f of x equals 3x minus 2. They want you to find the inverse. I know they're asking you to find the inverse because I see f negative 1, which means f inverse. So start by making it y equals. Then your next step is to switch x and y. And the last step is to get y by itself. So I'm going to bring over the 2. And I'm going to divide by 3. If you like that as an answer, that is perfectly fine. However, you can also see the answer as 1 over 3x, so 1/3 x, plus 2/3 is equal to y. What's really important is if you left your answer like this on the regions and on my test, you will get a point taken off because the question asked you to find f inverse, and right now you have y equals. So if you're starting with f of x, you better end with an f of x. So the correct answer is really going to be f inverse is x plus 2 over 3, or you can have f inverse is 1/3 x plus 2/3. I don't care which one you prefer, however, it has to be in the blue. If you leave out the f inverse, you lose a point. If it asks you for find f inverse, if the question starts with a y equals, then your answer is going to be y inverse equals. Let's try a few more problems. We're going to start the same exact way. We're going to write it as y equals x squared minus 6. You're going to switch x and y. And you're going to get y by itself. You're going to bring over the 6. And you're going to get x plus 6 is equal to y squared. In order to get the y by itself, you need to take the square root of both sides. Please be careful when you take the square root of something. You need to include a plus or minus. So really, your answer should be not y equals because we started with f of x. We're going to have f inverse of x is equal to plus or minus x plus 6. You lose a point if you leave out the f inverse, and you lose a point if you leave out the plus or minus. Doing the next one, rewrite it as y equals the cubed root of x minus 8, switch x and y. And now solve for y. We're going to bring over the 8. to get x plus 8 is equal to the cubed root of y. In order to undo a cubed root, you have to cube it. So before we had an exponent, so we took a root. Now we have a root, and we're going to raise it to an exponent. So I'm going to cube both sides. Make sure that you put the cubed on the outside of the parentheses. Do not write x cubed plus 8 cubed. That is not the same thing. Now you're going to end up with an answer of x plus 8 cubed is equal to y, but we have f of x. So I'm really going to write this as f inverse. Keep in mind, to undo a squared, you take the square. To undo a cubed root, you need to cube it. Okay, we're going to do one more example. We're going to find the inverse of f of x equals 2x cubed. So we're going to write this as y equals 2x cubed. Switch x and y, and solve for y. So you're going to divide both sides by 2. And now in order to get y by itself, we have an exponent, so we need to take a root. If you have y cubed, you need to take the cubed root. Now, before, when we took a root, we included a plus or minus. We are not doing that this time. You do not put a plus or minus for cubed roots. So your final answer should be f inverse x is the cubed root of x over 2. So in your notes, only include the plus or minus when taking an even root. So the square root, 2, right, is an even number. If you were to take the 4th root, the 6th root, the 20th root, you should include a plus or minus. However, you do not include plus or minus signs when taking an odd root. So in this case, the cubed root 3 is an odd number, no plus or minus. The 5th root, the 7th root, the 9th root, all odd roots do not get plus or minuses, and that's very important to remember. And that's all for this video.